Vanessa didn't need to raise her voice. She simply turned to the in-flight supervisor, David Palmer, and said, "Check the footage." The moment stretched, thick with tension. Cynthia's confident smirk faltered, her fingers twitching at her sides. David's eyes narrowed. "The passenger across the aisle recorded everything," Vanessa said smoothly, nodding toward the woman in 4A who held up her phone. "And I imagine by now, it's already online." A hush fell over the cabin. The businessman in 3C adjusted his tie, hiding a knowing smirk. Cynthia's face paled as her own words, the ones laced with condescension, the ones meant to make Vanessa feel small, now had an audience far beyond this plane. David took a slow breath, then turned to Cynthia. "Miss Hayes, we'll discuss this in the galley. Now." Passengers whispered. A notification pinged from a phone. The world was watching. As Cynthia walked away, shoulders stiff with defeat, Vanessa exhaled. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. If you believe in standing up against injustice, drop A in the comments. Let's talk about it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story, because when we speak up, we make change happen. The first-class cabin smelled of freshly brewed espresso and polished leather, a silent promise of luxury. The cream-colored seats gleamed under the soft overhead lighting, each one a cocoon of privilege. Vanessa Carter, 38, strode down the aisle with effortless grace, the rhythmic click of her Louboutin heels tapping against the floor. This flight from New York to Los Angeles wasn't just a trip. It was a celebration, a reward. A multi-million-dollar deal, months in the making, had finally been sealed. She had earned this. Every inch of this first-class experience belonged to her. She adjusted the sleeve of her tailored blazer, smoothing out an invisible crease before settling into seat 3A. Her Louis Vuitton carry-on slid effortlessly into the compartment above. But as she reached to fasten her seatbelt, she felt it. The stare. Cold, lingering, unwelcome. Across the aisle, Cynthia Hayes, a flight attendant in a crisp navy uniform, stood stock still, her blue eyes locked onto Vanessa. It wasn't the usual glance flight attendants gave while checking for safety compliance. This was different. Vanessa's fingers instinctively brushed against the gold cross necklace resting at her collarbone, her grandmother's, a silent reminder of resilience. She exhaled slowly. She had seen this before, and she knew exactly where it was going. Vanessa let out a slow breath, rolling her shoulders as she leaned back into the plush leather. The spacious first-class cabin was a welcome contrast to the cramped seats she usually endured on business trips. She had worked tirelessly for years, climbing the corporate ladder to get here, to this moment, a rare luxury she had rightfully earned. But then, a shadow loomed over her. Vanessa looked up just as Cynthia Hayes, the flight attendant from earlier, approached with a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. There was something forced about it, something calculated. "Miss, are you sure you're in the right seat?" The words sliced through the cabin's soft hum of conversation and clinking glasses. Vanessa blinked, momentarily thrown off. The question was wrapped in artificial politeness, but the implication burned underneath. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice calm but razor-sharp. Cynthia tilted her head slightly, her gaze sweeping over Vanessa like an unspoken challenge. "This is first class? Let me see your boarding pass." The air between them stretched taut. Vanessa felt the shift in the cabin. The businessman in 3C folded his newspaper, his sharp eyes peeking over the rim. The woman in 4A lowered her phone, her thumb hesitating over the screen. The murmurs of passengers softened, ears perking up to witness the unfolding tension. Vanessa inhaled deeply, willing herself to keep her composure. She had been in too many boardrooms, too many high-stakes meetings to be rattled this easily. Instead, she offered a slow, deliberate smile and reached for her boarding pass, holding it between two fingers as she met Cynthia's gaze head-on. "You already verified our tickets at the gate," she said, her voice smooth, steady. "But sure, knock yourself out." Cynthia's nostrils flared, just barely, but Vanessa caught it. She snatched the ticket from Vanessa's hand, her eyes flicking over the details. There was no mistake. Seat 3A, first class. Vanessa Carter. Cynthia's grip on the paper tightened, her knuckles whitening for the briefest second before she let out a clipped exhale. Instead of an apology, instead of a simple, "Enjoy your flight, Ms. Carter," she muttered. Just double-checking. And with that, she spun on her heel and walked away. Vanessa's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Not yet. As Cynthia disappeared down the aisle, the businessman in 3C let out a low, knowing chuckle, shaking his head before flipping his newspaper back open. The woman in 4A shot Vanessa a sympathetic glance before looking down at her phone again. Vanessa exhaled, forcing herself to relax. She had seen this before, too many times, and she knew deep down that this wasn't over. Vanessa took a slow breath, forcing herself to shake off the interaction. She had dealt with subtle digs like that before, the kind wrapped in forced politeness, designed to make her question her own reaction. Let it go, she told herself. She was here to enjoy her flight, not to get dragged into someone else's ignorance. The flight attendants began making their rounds, handing out pre-departure drinks. Cynthia moved gracefully down the aisle, her demeanor suddenly warm and engaging. She leaned in to chat with an older white couple in row 1, laughing at a joke the man made. She offered an extra-wide smile to a businessman in 2B as she placed a glass of champagne on his tray table. Even the young woman in 4A got a friendly nod as Cynthia set down her drink. Then she got to Vanessa. Gone was the warmth, the effortless charm. Cynthia barely made eye contact as she placed a glass of water in front of her without a word. The contrast was too obvious to ignore. Vanessa's fingers tightened around the cool glass, but she said nothing. She refused to let this woman get under her skin. Just as she was about to take a sip, movement in her peripheral vision caught her attention. Cynthia had stopped, standing just a foot away, her gaze fixed. Not on Vanessa's face, but lower. The gold cross necklace. Vanessa instinctively reached up, her fingers brushing the smooth, familiar pendant. It was a delicate piece, small but meaningful. It had once belonged to her grandmother, a woman who had taught her strength, resilience, and dignity in the face of prejudice. A woman who had faced far worse than an entitled flight attendant with a superiority complex. "That's quite the statement piece," Cynthia said, her voice dripping with something Vanessa couldn't quite place. Vanessa's spine stiffened. There was nothing casual about the way Cynthia had said it. "It wasn't a compliment. It was my grandmother's," Vanessa replied evenly, watching for Cynthia's reaction. Cynthia scoffed, shaking her head like she had just heard something amusing. "Well," she said, "you don't see a lot of those up here." Silence. The air in the cabin seemed to shift, tense and crackling. The businessman in 3C folded his newspaper slowly, like he wanted to hear every word. A woman in 5A leaned toward her husband, whispering. Even the hum of the engines felt muted, as if the plane itself was listening. Vanessa felt a slow heat creeping up her neck. "And what exactly do you mean by that?" she asked, her tone measured but laced with steel. Cynthia smirked, like she was enjoying this. "Oh, nothing," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Just saying. Some people think a seat in first class means they belong everywhere." The words landed like a slap. A weight settled in Vanessa's chest. This wasn't just about her necklace. It wasn't just about her seat. This woman was making it crystal clear that she didn't think Vanessa belonged here at all. A few rows ahead, the businessman in 3C let out a quiet sigh, shaking his head again. Across the aisle, the young woman in 4A adjusted her phone in her lap, tilting it slightly. Vanessa barely caught it out of the corner of her eye. She wasn't texting. She wasn't scrolling. She was recording. And Cynthia had no idea. Vanessa squared her shoulders, keeping her expression steady even as irritation simmered beneath the surface. She had spent years navigating spaces where people like Cynthia questioned her presence, from executive boardrooms to luxury hotels, but she had never let it shake her, and she wouldn't start now. "You might want to be careful with your words," Vanessa said, her voice calm but firm. She let the sentence linger, let the weight of it settle in the air before adding, "Because you never know who's listening." Cynthia's fake smile flickered. It was quick, just a flicker of uncertainty, but Vanessa caught it. Across the aisle, the businessman in 3C shifted in his seat, clearing his throat. "Miss Hayes," he said smoothly, folding his hands over his newspaper. "I suggest you move along." It was a simple statement, but the authority in his voice left no room for argument. For a moment, Cynthia just stood there, her jaw clenched so tightly Vanessa could see the muscles twitch in her cheek. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed toward the galley. Vanessa exhaled slowly, trying to release the tension tightening her shoulders. But something about Cynthia's body language, the way her hands balled into fists as she walked away, made it clear this wasn't over. Moments passed. Flight attendants continued their drink service. Conversations resumed. But Vanessa could still feel the eyes on her, as if the entire cabin had just witnessed something unspoken but deeply understood. Then Cynthia returned, and this time she wasn't alone. Beside her stood another flight attendant, a woman with sharp features and a tight bun. Her name tag read Lisa Calloway. Unlike Cynthia, Lisa's expression was unreadable, her posture stiff with professionalism, but there was no mistaking why she was here. Vanessa set down her glass, already bracing for whatever nonsense was coming next. "I need you to step aside while we verify something with your ticket," Cynthia announced, her tone crisp, her fake politeness completely gone. A ripple of murmurs rolled through the cabin. Vanessa's stomach twisted. She was being singled out? Passengers exchanged glances. Across the aisle, the woman with the phone zoomed in. This was calculated. This was intentional. Vanessa's fingers curled over the armrest, but her voice remained steady. "No," she said. "I want a supervisor. Now." Cynthia froze. That wasn't the reaction she had expected. A presence loomed at the front of the cabin, tall and commanding. The man in the dark suit walked with deliberate steps, his name tag glinting under the cabin lights. David Palmer, in-flight supervisor. His face was unreadable, his movements smooth, the kind of corporate professional trained to de-escalate chaos before it spiraled into a PR nightmare. "What's the issue here?" His voice carried just enough authority to make the nearby passengers pause their conversations, ears perking up. Vanessa turned to him, meeting his gaze without hesitation, without fear. She didn't need to raise her voice. The strength in her words did all the work. "This flight attendant has been harassing me," she said, slow and deliberate, giving Cynthia nowhere to hide. A nervous laugh escaped Cynthia's lips, brittle and forced. She glanced at Lisa, as if expecting backup, but Lisa simply stepped back. "That's ridiculous," Cynthia snapped, her voice a little too loud, a little too eager to discredit Vanessa before she could say another word. David frowned, his eyes narrowing slightly. His gaze flicked to Vanessa, assessing her, then to Cynthia, as if searching for cracks in her confidence. "Passengers," he said, his voice firm but measured, "can you confirm this?" The businessman in 3C lowered his newspaper and raised his hand without hesitation. "Yes," he said, his tone cool but sharp with disapproval. "She's right, I saw everything." A small collective shift rippled through the cabin. More heads turned, bodies subtly adjusting toward Vanessa and Cynthia. Cynthia stiffened, her throat bobbing in a hard swallow, but it wasn't over yet. The woman across the aisle, the one who had been recording, tilted her phone toward David. "I got it all on camera," she said, her voice neutral, controlled. But there was power in that statement. a weight that made Cynthia visibly pale. Boom. The power shift happened in an instant. Cynthia's face drained of color, her lips parting slightly, but no words came out. Vanessa didn't move, didn't smirk, didn't gloat. She simply waited. Because now, Cynthia wasn't in control anymore. David's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. An edge, a quiet finality. He turned to Cynthia, his voice as sharp as ice. "Miss Hayes, follow me." The command landed like a gavel in a courtroom. Cynthia's mouth opened, then closed. She stammered, her bravado crumbling. "Wait, Now." Passengers stirred, a ripple of murmurs moving through the cabin. Some leaned in, whispering behind hands. Others pretended to look away but stole quick, knowing glances. Cynthia's face burned red. Her fingers twitched at her sides like she wanted to argue, to fight back, but there was nothing left to say. The evidence, the witnesses, the recording, had stripped her of whatever illusion of control she thought she had. With stiff movements, she turned and walked down the aisle toward the galley, behind her Lisa trailing behind her like a silent shadow. As she disappeared behind the curtain, Vanessa finally allowed herself to breathe. The tension in her shoulders eased, but not entirely. She had fought battles like this before, in boardrooms where men twice her age had underestimated her, in deals where she had to prove she was twice as good to get half as much credit. This wasn't new, but it never got easier. David turned back to her, his face a careful mask of corporate professionalism. "Miss Carter, I sincerely apologize. She will not be returning to this flight." Vanessa met his eyes, searching for something real behind the rehearsed apology. A flicker of regret, embarrassment, acknowledgement of what had really happened here. She found nothing but polished diplomacy. She nodded once. "Thank you." David hesitated, like he wanted to say more, but then straightened his tie and turned away, already moving on to the next order of business. The plane continued its flight, the hum of the engine steady, but the energy in the cabin had changed. Conversations picked up again, but they were different now, charged with curiosity, awareness. A few passengers looked at Vanessa with quiet respect, others with something more complicated. Guilt, maybe, or recognition. The businessman in 3C caught her eye, gave her a small nod. The woman who had recorded everything tapped her phone screen. "I'll be posting this," she said under her breath, just loud enough for Vanessa to hear. Vanessa hesitated for half a second, then nodded back. By the time the plane landed, the world had already seen it. As Vanessa stepped into the jet bridge, she caught a glimpse of Cynthia near the crew station, clutching her phone. Her face was ghost white, her eyes locked onto the screen. She wasn't looking at Vanessa. She wasn't looking at anything but the flood of notifications, comments, and outrage spreading across social media like wildfire. She had underestimated Vanessa, and now the entire world knew. Vanessa didn't stop. She didn't look back. She walked off that plane with her head high, her heels clicking against the jet bridge floor, her presence undeniable. She had spent years perfecting this. The quiet strength, the controlled composure, the ability to navigate spaces where people doubted she belonged. But today, she hadn't just held her ground, she had won. Outside the terminal, the California sun hit her face, warm and steady. The tension that had coiled in her muscles throughout the flight finally began to unravel. She reached for her phone and, almost without thinking, opened social media. It was everywhere. A flood of comments, shares, and reposts. The video had spread like wildfire. People were furious, outraged, demanding answers. The hashtags were already trending. Accountability in air. Racist flight attendant. Vanessa Carter deserves better. A news article had picked it up. Another influencer had stitched the video, calling out the airline. Even people who hadn't seen the full story were talking about it, feeling it, recognizing something in it that wasn't just about Vanessa, but about all the times this had happened before. Cynthia had thought she could get away with it. But prejudice thrives in quiet moments. And this was no longer quiet. Vanessa scrolled through the comments. She really thought she could get away with this in 2024. The way she was smiling like she wasn't being recorded. That's the best part. This is why we record everything. This is why we speak up. Airlines need to start firing people immediately. Enough of this reviewing the situation nonsense. One comment caught her attention. "I've been there, Vanessa. I've been in that seat. Thank you for standing up, even when you shouldn't have had to." Vanessa felt something shift inside her. Because that was it, wasn't it? No one should have to prove they belong. She had paid for that seat like everyone else. She had earned that comfort, that right to sit without question, without judgment. Yet people like Cynthia still existed. People who saw certain faces in certain spaces and made snap decisions about who deserved to be there. She thought of her grandmother, the woman who had given her that gold cross, the woman who had taught her to never let anyone tell her where she belonged. She thought of the woman in 4A who had seen injustice and recorded it, the businessman in 3C who had spoken up, the passengers who had witnessed something wrong and refused to stay silent. She thought of the thousands of people now watching the video, feeling something, anger, frustration, recognition, and deciding to speak up too. Vanessa took one last look at the screen, then locked her phone. This wasn't just about her anymore. It never was. Have you ever experienced or witnessed something like this? What would you have done? Let's talk in the comments. If you stand against discrimination, share this story. Let's make sure no one gets away with this ever again. Subscribe for more real stories that challenge injustice.